Now, there is a bunch of problems with his argument because, in a sense, what he is saying is that I don't see an evidence cross-country that there is a lot of increase in GDP coming from increasing education. But the issue is we don't know why these countries increased education. We don't know what would have happened if they had not increased education. So, for example, it is many of the African countries that increased education the most also had civil war subsequently. It is possible that education caused the civil war, but it's not very likely. It is more likely that the social tension that pre-existed in the country caused the civil war. And those social tension may also, one possible answer to this social tension may have been, well, let's try and get people an education. Your macro class, you may have been interpreting this graph. Right. You may have been interpreting and there are certainly a lot of theories for why education would be good for growth. So one of them is the one you point out, which is education allows the some people, this is the externality argument that we were making about the movie. One person who is educated can figure out some technology, and then everybody can use the technology, so there are all these spillovers, which is why we would get this pretty strong relationship between education and income. So there are a lot of theoretical reasons to think that there could be a macroeconomic relationship between education and income. And in fact, we see one, which is why everybody sort of is happy thinking education is a good thing. What Easterly is saying is just commenting this graph, which is he doesn't see a relationship, because when he does the relationship in differences now between growth in education and growth in income, he doesn't see the relationship anymore.
How long is that, by the way? Like
that's 1990, 1965. It's about 30 years. Yep.
I have a question. In Easterly's paper, he mentions the productivity factor. And he says that only a small percentage of this is accounted for by human capital and by machinery and other forms of capital. What is the rest of it? Like, what is productivity in that case?
So that's an excellent question, which is the answer to this question is that's why I do what I do and not macroeconomics. If you're looking at growth across a country and you're trying to account for the growth in a pure accounting sense, which is to say, so imagine that each country is a big machine. Think of a country as a machine. So there is a machine, there is some people to operate the machine, labor, and there is some human capital to think about how to operate the machine, and then there is some spunk. So think of a macroeconomy as that. In letters, we write it as an A multiplied by K, that's the capital, to some power, multiplied by L to some power, multiplied by human capital to some power. That's your macroeconomic model of an economy. Now, when we look at, so now we can observe K to some extent, what's the capital in the economy. We can observe L to some extent, to a pretty good extent, how many workers there are in the economy. We can observe H to some extent, what is the human capital, usually measured with education. And then we can say, well, let's look at now what part, and the rest spunk is what we don't observe. Now we can say, well, let's look at what share of the level of income of the country, differences in income across country, or what share of differences in growth across country are explained by those factors. And the answer is not very much. So the answer is that with factors such as capital, labor, and human capital, measured in this way, we don't explain much of the growth differences across country. This is one of the reasons why, which is when you look at growth and you look at differences in human capital, there's just no relationship. There's a bit more with physical capital, and the rest is like, we don't know. So technological progress is just a fancy term for we have no clue what the hell is going on. Which is to me saying that, well, if we have no clue what the hell is going on, then it means that we need to go beyond like thinking of the economy as one big machine. And we need to start to understand what is happening at the local micro level that might start giving us a sense of what might actually be going on. Because technological progress is not just like how good is the chip in your computer. You think of this as like, as I was saying, the spunk, how people interact, all of that. So that's the, so in your macro class, you either saw this graph and commented on it, or you may have also seen a graph where you have growth on the left-hand side and level of education. You do see a strong relationship between growth and level. These countries which had more education in 1965 have grown faster between 65 and 1990. But what Easterly objects to that is that, yes, of course, because if you anticipate growth, that's how you're going to decide to get an education, because education becomes more worthwhile. So that does not tell me that education is worth anything. So that's where we are with the macro data. And my bottom line is not that your macro class is wrong or that your macro class is right. My bottom line is we just don't know by just looking at this data. We don't have enough data points, and anything could have happened. And the countries which were about to have wars may have invested more in education, perhaps as an attempt to not have those wars, or who knows. So in order to answer the question of what's the benefits of education, we need to look at a specific example. So ideally, I would have liked to look at for you at the example of Turkey, because we just saw it in the movie, but I don't have it. So we'll be looking at the example of Indonesia. So if we're looking at the effect of supply-driven expansion, there are some arguments when one could see that it's not going to work. And these are the arguments that Easterly is making. And we kind of all saw them in the movie. There was the point about the teacher quality. You know, if the teachers don't care because they've just been parachuted by the central government to the community, exactly as you were saying, then you know, the level of education is not going to be very good. If the parents don't care and just do it because they have to do it, then they are not going to put pressure on the teachers to actually deliver. And they are not going to put pressure on the children to actually learn. So the extreme cases is what the point that you were making earlier, where the children are all alone in boarding school and nobody is looking after what they do, and potentially they learn nothing, or they might learn to do all sorts of bad stuff. So if parents do not think that schools are delivering anything useful, then they won't pay attention. And finally, children, if they also don't care, won't pay attention. So these are all theoretical arguments. I'm not saying they are correct, but these are the type of argument that Easterly is making.